All right, we're at 2:05. I think we've got 32 people on, and I think we're about ready to start. Um, so anyway, we're very happy to have Bill Swislow here with us today to do a presentation on the carvings and artwork in the revetments up and down Lakeshore Drive. And Dottie is going to do the introduction.
So welcome, Bill. Bill was a founder and longtime executive at cars.com, and he now is a digital media consultant, writer, art collector, and operator of the cultural website interestingideas.com. He serves as a lecturer at Northwestern's Medill School of Journalism and sits on the boards of Intuit, which is the Center for Intuitive and Outside Art, as well as for the Society for Commercial Archaeology. Before joining cars.com, Bill held several roles at the Chicago Tribune, including interactive marketplace editor after serving several years as an editor in the newspaper's business section. Prior to his time with Tribune, he served as a managing editor and writer at the Society of Professional Journalists, Quill magazine, and interestingly edited alternative weeklies in New England and California. Bill has written extensively about art for a variety of publications, including the Chicago Tribune, the International Art Journal, Raw Vision, and the Society for Commercial Archaeology Journal. And he's curated art exhibitions focused on art made from bottle caps, on folk crafts, on metalwork, Stanley Swarzik, and most recently on work by lesser known and anonymous artists, mostly from Chicago, an exhibit that is currently touring in Europe. So welcome, Bill.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here, and I'm sure we'd all rather be here looking at a Zoom screen than enjoying the lakefront. But my hope is that I'll help you appreciate the lakefront a little bit more the next time you get out there, which will probably be soon. Bear with me for 1 second. I'm trying to clear my screen here. Okay, but what I want to help you think about is that if you, next time you take a walk at the lakefront, what I want you to do is look down, and I'll help you sort of see what you might find there. Give me 1 sec here to, there we go. Sorry, I had to get in sequence here. What you'll see if you look down is an amazing art gallery that is pretty much unknown, but it's installed on those limestone blocks, the revetments that have lined the shore. And in many places, they've lined the shore for close to 100 years, coming up on 100 years. It's an art gallery, which is what I find most interesting, but it's also a kind of social history of the millions of people who've spent time on the lakefront over the last 100 or so years. You know, this picture is very representative. This is, as some of you probably, I'm sure, can recognize, this is from Hyde Park. This is from the 1950s, showing, you know, all the people who have been using the lake for all this time. Some of those people who've hung out at the lakefront has left behind a legacy, like this one at 49th Street. You know, people like Mike and Chris and Ed and Chaz and many more, and really there are thousands who've left something permanent behind. But these petroglyphs are pretty much unknown. Very few people have noticed them. You know, what I find exciting is that these carvings show that art can be found anywhere, not just in institutions. And some of it's really creative, like this delicate mermaid sitting on the edge of a rock here. But sometimes the art can be hard to see. There's the mermaid, but if you're walking by this rock, which is at Foster Avenue Beach, there's a good chance you're not going to notice that as you walk by. They can be hard to see. And in fact, I didn't find them on my own. I have to give credit to a friend and colleague, Aaron Packer, a local art dealer, who told me about these. He had been photographing them starting in the 1980s and 90s. He actually had an exhibit at the Cultural Center in 1992 of his photographs of the lakefront carvings. That was kind of the high watermark for public knowledge of these carvings. And then after that, they kind of faded back into obscurity. But Aaron and I both have a real interest in outsider art by people who don't consider themselves artists, which I think applies to most of the people who've made these carvings on the lakefront. So it's very exciting to find these carvings. At first, I thought maybe there were a few dozen, then maybe a few hundred, but now I know there are thousands of them having walked the lakefront. And if you just look down, you might see a foot, you might see a hand, you know, you might see a lion. This lion's at Foster Beach. What I love about the lion is that someone carved this lion, but then someone later came and painted it, gave it a body and a tail, sort of enhanced it. And I love that the body looks sort of like a Jackson Pollock painting. You might see a horse like this one. There's several horses along the lake. And then maybe an interesting face or two. This one is at Montrose Beach. It's often covered with sand, but when it's not, it is clearly, this mask is very sharp. This one is nearby, also near Montrose Beach. I like to think of this as John Malkovich, although, you know, what the carver had in mind, I have no idea. You might see a name like our friend Bill Adler up here at Morgan Shoal, or you might see hearts, lots of hearts. You might see a double heart like this one, or heart like this one with an arrow running through it. You know, you look around, you'll see the beach, and then you might see Abe Lincoln. This is back at Foster Beach. Where Abe Lincoln is at Foster Beach, there's about 20 limestone blocks that are the very north line, the north end of the beach, and those blocks, there are 30 carvings just on those blocks. Those blocks are as wide as 8 feet. Some of them actually get wider in other places. You know, these 30 carvings are among the thousands that stretch all the way from the Indiana state line up to Hollywood Avenue and Osterman Beach. This group at Foster Beach is one of the more interesting concentrations. You have this lovely little bathing beauty. This is a very small carving. It's maybe a half a foot tall. You have carvings like this, which, you know, people did not make them to be famous or make money, but, you know, someone put a lot of time into this carving. If you look carefully, you'll see there's a couple of fish. This is the date, 1958. So this was carved shortly after Foster Beach was built and opened, because it was built in the late 1950s. There's a little squirrel there. I think maybe that's a wheat sheaf, a sheaf of wheat. I'm not really sure, but very complex, very delicately carved. Similarly delicate, maybe by the same person, because they're right next to each other, is this longhorn steer. You can see the horns and the snout of that steer. Near that, there's a castle on a hill. There's this pirate face. And then this one, which is always been one of my favorite carvings. You'll see I have a few favorites, but this is one of them. You know, I think of this as a triptych, although it's probably by 3 different people. You have Nixon TV set with Nixon written underneath it, you know, somewhat mysterious what the intention was, but it's a nice vintage television set. You have the crosses of Calvary, and I gotta think it was not this carver of the crosses who wrote "Dead Ha Ha" underneath. This seems a little inconsistent there. And then right next to those, you have this, you know, lovely sort of detailed fish, you know, one of many fish that are carved along the lakefront. You know, all in one rock, probably by different hands, different times. What I like to think of, and it's a good example of the way I think of the lakefront and these carvings, is constituting a collective work of art. You know, that thousands of people contributed to creating this environment of carvings. And it's a good guess, as I said, that most of them didn't consider themselves artists or what they were doing art, but I would argue that it constitutes extremely high levels of artistic creativity. You know, who are these carvers? Well, in this case, I can tell you there was Doc, and there was Sid, and there was Mo, and Victor, and Otto, and Wilcox, and Marty, and there actually are 40 names on this one rock. This is at Foster Beach, right next to the other ones I've been showing you. One little sidelight, you know, there's a little bit of wishful thinking when I think about these rocks, but Foster Beach there was where the gentleman who wrote the play Grease hung out with his friends from high school that the play is based on. In fact, there's a song in the play, in the original play, called Foster Beach, that was dropped when they took it to Broadway, because of course New Yorkers wouldn't really care about our Foster Beach. But I like to think that maybe one or more of the people who signed this rock, which there's a little date at the bottom here, 1961, around the same time, might have been people who showed up ultimately in Greece, but who knows? That's purely speculation. Now, most of the artists are anonymous, even when we have a first name, that's all we know, but some of them are not. Some of them are even still alive. In this case, Bob Nachtrieb, it's a little hard to read, but Bob has an unusual enough name that I was able to track him down online and spoke to him a couple years ago. So Bob Nachtrieb and his friend Cliff Weaver were freshmen at the U of C. And, you know, he said one morning, late spring of 1964, they had to get away from the school there. You know, as we all know, it can be kind of a grind. And so they went out like he said, like 4 or 5 a.m. and went to Promontory Point and put their names and their girlfriends' names on the rocks. He said that they were stopped by a police officer walking to the rocks because they had hammers and chisels that belonged to Bob's father, and they looked a little suspicious. But when the cop asked them what they were going to do, he said they told them we were going to go carve our names on Promontory Point, and so the cop let him go. He said it took them a few hours to do the carvings. He said he was not that impressed with the quality of his carving, but what is impressive is that Bob is, you know, married today to Linda Turner, and Cliff is still married today to Donna Florence all these years later. Bob told me he didn't think he ever showed the carving to his wife. He eventually went into the Foreign Service, retired, and lives in Joliet. Cliff is a prominent zoning lawyer who was in, I saw an article about him from a few years ago because he and his wife had bought a Chianti winery in Italy. So that's Bob and Cliff, a couple of the artists. Here's the spot if you want to go look at their carvings. It's right here at the south eastern tip of the point. Cliff's carving, that's where Cliff is carved. So it has a nice view over there across to the museum. Quite pleasant. Others left traces of their identity up and down the lakefront as well. Rainbow Beach has a lot of these traces, and we'll talk about a few of them. So Rainbow Beach, around 75th, 76th Street. These rocks are, this is this revetment and then a jetty are near the south end of the beach, near the water treatment plant there. You know, this is an example of the kind of what people left behind, the sort of memorials they left behind. So this one says Knox College, Ginny Daniel, Tri Delta. These rocks have shifted, but if you line them up, it says Hal Martin Grabow, 53, 54, 53, 4, 5, 5 gamma delta. So this carving was made by Hal Martin Grabow. There's Hal on the left. He also did, it's a little harder to read, but this is on the other end of Rainbow Beach. He did the carving on the right. So I was able to get some facts about Hal. Born in 1936. He died in 2013. He went to Hirsch High School, 3 miles west of Rainbow Beach, went to Knox College, joined the Navy. He later on became a part-time policeman in Walworth County, Wisconsin. He remarried a woman named Betty Hartzell in 1977. When he died, he was survived by one of 3 sons from an earlier marriage, as well as a sister and many stepchildren and grandchildren. So, you know, there's a little story about Hal, even though Hal is long gone, but Hal remains memorialized at Rainbow Beach. And I know that Hal was a lifeguard at Rainbow Beach. You know, how do I know that? Well, someone else who left a trace of his identity, Buzz Zingaro, which you can see on this rock. It's up here at the top of the rock. So Buzz also put a date on there, 1963, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Buzz was a lifeguard at Rainbow Beach, and he said when they had downtime, the lifeguards would make carvings. He said we had some hammers and chisels that we trade around, and whoever was working that day would carve their name. And he was attending Leo High School when he started as a lifeguard, and he went on to be a school teacher. He said that because he worked at the south end of Rainbow Beach, there wasn't a whole lot to do, because basically all you did if you were a lifeguard at the south end was to tell people to stay off of the rocks. So he said he had plenty of time to make carvings. But we'll see Buzz. You can also see a trace of Buzz at the other end of Rainbow Beach, the north end. on this rock, because along with Spike and some of the other guys down here, you can see it says Kathy and Buzz. And what's nice again is that Kathy and Buzz are still together today. When I talked to Buzz, he said Kathy was right next to him. So Kathy and Buzz at Rainbow Beach. Another Rainbow Beach figure who's identifiable, Guy Lazzara. You may notice all in these cases, these are all folks who had kind of different kinds of names. So it was not too hard, not impossible to find them, although I had to put a fair amount of work to get contact information for the ones who are still alive. So Guy lives in the suburbs. He said he was a steel worker back then, went to Rainbow Beach to get away from the Southworks, and he made this carving. He said, I did that without a picture, just by measuring with fingers. I was just doing my own thing, and when I was doing it, no one was paying attention to what I was doing. Now you'll notice, so the picture next to it, next to his name, he said it was a self-portrait, and you'll notice it's pretty rough. He told me that he went back shortly after he made the carving, and it had been vandalized. So it was vandalized back in the day, but it's still quite a, to me, quite a fetching picture. And again, Guy is memorialized there at Rainbow Beach, and will be, we hope, for a long time to come. While we're at Rainbow Beach, I got to show you one more a pair of rocks from there, just because these are such beautiful carvings. So you have NG or Engay at the left with that sort of cartoon sort of face, and then this really nice little skull at the corner of this rock right next to it. And all these rocks are pretty close to each other. I mean, it's a pretty amazing concentration of talent. As we know, some of it by lifeguards, but some of it, like Guy Lazzara, just by people who were hanging out at Rainbow Beach. So one of the carvers, of all the carvers, and the few have been identified, one of them actually got some recognition. And that was one of the four men who made this carving. He was a former steel worker and self-taught stone carver named Roman Villarreal. And in 1986, he carved this mermaid. This is now sitting, as you see it here, at the southern end of Oakwood Beach, but it was originally on the edge of the lake at 39th Street, right on the water. And over the years, the Park District actually saved it. One of the few rocks that, of a small number of rocks that were saved when work has been done on the lakefront, and it eventually wound up here at Oakwood Beach. But no one knew who made it for many years, really until 2000. It was a mystery who made the mermaid. And the Sun-Times, Chicago Sun-Times, did a story in 2000, which we'll see in a second, about the mystery mermaid. And when that story appeared, and here's the article on the left, Roman's daughter, who was the model that the guys used when they carved the mermaid, spoke up and went to the Sun-Times and said, hey, my father worked on that carving. And then, so you can see the carving here is in its original placement right on the lake. And then here's a picture, obviously not the best reproduction, but the guy's working on it. And there's Roman, because the Sun-Times then did another story when they found out who did the carving. Roman said that they were worried about the police, but he said even when the police came by, they didn't, the police did not give them a hard time for what they were doing. Roman is still active today. He's a prolific artist. He paints as well as carves stones. This is him in his studio last year. It's almost underneath the Skyway. He's got carvings in a number of Chicago parks, as well as some other artwork around the city. So he's been a very successful artist, but he basically taught himself how to carve limestone. The reason they carved that mermaid, he told me, was he had a friend, another stone carver who was from Mexico, and they wanted to do some work. And it's not that easy to find big pieces of rock available for carving. And he said the limestone of the lakefront was there, and it was just great raw material for them. So that's why they decided to carve the mermaid. And he said they did the mermaid because his friend specialized in nude figures. And Roman said that they could probably get away with a mermaid without raising any eyebrows. And so they They did a nude, but it was a mermaid and therefore more acceptable. But Roman and the guys I just talked about are the exceptions. For the most part, even carvings that are signed and dated are effectively anonymous, the vast majority. So we know this fish was carved in 1958. This is north of Foster Beach, but who or what GAR is, other than Grand Army of the Republic, which seems more likely to be initials, we don't know. And the anonymity even applies to this and a group of carvings. There's the largest group of carvings all along the lake by a single hand are about a dozen carvings, much like this one, that cluster north and south of Foster Avenue Beach. I actually saw the carver at work on one of these carvings in the mid-1990s. He was an Hispanic man. He was using basic hand tools, a hammer and chisels. But he did these really elaborate carvings. As I say, he did about a dozen of them. Here's another example of the largest of them. It may be the largest single carving anywhere along the lakefront. That stone it's carved on is about 9 feet wide. You can see in the middle here, when I click through, there's a face in the middle of that figure. These carvings are really elaborate, really complicated. So if you look at this carving, same carver, very hard to read. I mean, exactly what that is very hard to tell. It has some nice features. It has the X's, the bricks. That's actually the date in the signature, but we don't know who this man is. I didn't have the presence of mind when I saw him to chat with him or ask him who he was. So there you go. But his carvings are full of symbols. There are Quetzalcoatls, other kinds of Mesoamerican seeming symbols. And there are lots of other symbols along the lakefront. Most of the other ones are a lot easier to read, like this male and female symbol. You may also notice right down here, there's a itty little bitty peace symbol down at the bottom of this carving. This is another Morgan Shoal carving. Click through. Maltese Cross, this is at a group of carvings behind La Rabida Hospital. This is also near that Maltese Cross behind La Rabida, where there's a bunch of really nice carvings. I love this carving. It's got the peace symbol, peace written out. It's got the peace sign with the hand. It's got flowers. It's got butterflies. And it's kind of hard to see in this one, but there's a bare foot there. There's a bare foot. So you got the whole hippie package in one single carving on one rock. Peace symbol is very popular. There's a lot of them along the lake. This is one of the finest, best carved ones. This is at Fullerton Avenue, right at the lake. It's actually kind of over here on this set of rocks, but you can't see it in this picture. But these carvings are, as far as I know, unique in the world, really. There are analogs. I think in our country, the closest analogs might be the ancient petroglyphs in the American Southwest or in Hawaii. Overseas, the area of Sydney, Australia actually has a lot of Aboriginal carvings scattered around. The difference is those carvings are old, very old, whereas the carvings here are modern and they line one of the most popular stretches of real estate in the world. The fact that it's one of the most popular stretches, and popular I mean in terms of people using it, is what I think is the city's greatest cultural achievement, which is that the lakeshore was preserved free from industrial and commercial use. Now, in many ways, the shoreline didn't just happen, and certainly its availability didn't just happen. People trace the openness of Chicago's shoreline back to 1836, to this map, which was executed by some state commissioners who were sent to Chicago to get things in order here. And they wrote on this map in 1836, public ground, a common to remain forever open, clear, and free of any buildings or other obstructions, whatever. And on that was hung what turned into decades of political battles, litigation. Famously, Montgomery Ward, the real estate mogul, fought many battles in the early 1900s to keep the lakefront free of obstructions. The Field Museum was originally going to be built basically next to the Art Institute, which went up before Montgomery Ward got involved. But Ward fought and fought the Field Museum location, and eventually they came up with a compromise to move the Field Museum south of Grant Park. But there have been battles throughout, and many of them won. I mean, most recently, the battle over the George Lucas Museum. McCormick Place was one of the battles that was lost, but for the most part, the lakefront really is free of obstructions, the most of the length of the city. Now, the other battle is not just construction. The other battle is the lake itself and the weather of the lake. And there is a long, long history of storm damage and flooding. This is from 1901, the Chicago Tribune, showing some of the efforts then, early efforts to protect the lakefront. 1929, another storm, another flood. Should all be familiar to us because, of course, we're living through this same issue right now. Now it's 2020 and still fighting the lake. Now, one reason our lakefront is fragile and is so subject to storms and flooding, as some of you probably know, is that the lakefront we have is really not supposed to be there. The Chicago lakefront is an artificial construct, almost the entire lakefront, all the way pretty much from the Indiana state line up to Rogers Park. It's built on landfill. And that means that it requires exceptional measures to defend it. And a lot of measures were tried in the early part of the 20th century and didn't work. But starting in the 1920s, they started laying these limestone blocks. This is limestone the revetments being built up at Waveland, near Waveland, probably in the 1930s, although this picture is undated, to try to preserve the lakefront. This is a great example of the landfill. It's an aerial view of Promontory Point, showing the work that was underway before the landscaping in 1936. And you can see the cranes out there when they were putting in place the revetments, the blocks for the revetments. I like this. This is a drawing showing what the plans were for the landscaping from 1935. I like it because it kind of shows you how the revetments were constructed and the foundations for the revetments. One of the reasons why we see a lot of decay on these revetments is because in most places when they put in the limestone blocks, the actual framework for the foundation was timber. And the wood was fine, sort of counterintuitively, as long as the lake levels are high. But when the lake levels fell, earlier in the 20th century, I mean, this is, I think, in the 1980s, it exposed those timbers to the air, and that's when rot set in, and the timber started decaying, and the revetments started failing in some locations. This is, nonetheless, they've done a pretty good job preserving the shoreline, even if there were some places, including on the north side of Promontory Point, are in fairly bad shape. I also think the fact that, again, this is a little bit speculative, but the fact that so much of the shoreline is landfill is one reason it was preserved from industrial and commercial use, because with a few exceptions, most of the shoreline was never private property. It's always been public property, and so it made it a little bit easier to maintain it as parkland. And parkland that the limestone revetments have done a pretty good job preserving, as you can see from this aerial photo of the revetments around Promontory Point. And also, though, that limestone is great for carving because it's soft enough for people to carve without elaborate tools, but hard enough to last. And some of these have lasted a long time. This is the earliest date I've been able to find. This is at the Morgan Shoal area, June 1930. It was carved not long after the stone was laid. Now, what I like especially about this carving is you can almost see it from outer space. So this is a satellite photo. That's the carving. Maybe give them a few more years and we'll actually be able to read the carving, June 30, from outer space. But I was very excited when it occurred to me to see if I could see that one. There are paintings too, but of course paintings don't last very long, not as long as carvings. This is up at Foster Beach, which over the years was a platform for lots of paintings. This one is really cool. The real Mickey is retired and living in Miami. You can see he's got a walker and he's got a little beach umbrella there. These paintings are all faded away. Mickey is actually still there, very faded, but you can make them out if you know what to look for. There are those paintings just above Mickey as they looked in 2006. Here they are again. What I like to show with this picture though is not only do the paintings fade, but there's the beach and there's the same view in 2019. You can see, as we all know, how much the lake has reclaimed and taken away the beach. And in fact, if you notice right up here, you go to last week and even more of that beach. This is Foster Beach is gone. I mean, most of Foster Beach has been washed away at this point. Other paintings, this is also up at Foster Beach. This was originally painted in 1999. I saw the artist restoring this in 2016. It's basically a tribute to rock guitarists, although it's got some fanciful elements. But by 2018, it was already deteriorating. This is also around, this is actually closer to Hollywood, to Osterman Beach. Tribute to fallen folks in Cyrillic. This painting is from between Belmont and Diversey, that rocks area. It's called, really nice painting. So the rocks were this section between Diversey and Belmont harbors. It was particularly important in the gay community. It was a very, very popular hangout, but it was also important to artists and other people who had messages to share. There are paintings here, but you can also kind of see here, people left text on these stones. So here's an example. This is an extract from a Walt Whitman poem. These are just a handful of other paintings, and there were many more on the rocks. There were also carvings. This skull is just part of a really spectacular rock. So you see that rock, it has O Sole Mio, drink to me only with thine eyes. It's got a flag, got some names and initials. Very elaborate rock in that, you know, this is, again, north of Diversey, south of Belmont. So as the Hyde Parkers know, in the early 2000s, the city and the Army Corps of Engineers started this project to basically try to rebuild the lakefront. Because many of these revetments, as I explained, were decaying, were starting to fall into the lake. Before the project started, there was a fair amount of back and forth to try to get the Army Corps to agree to an approach that would be more respectful of the historic character of the lakefront. But in the end, other views prevailed. The community in Lakeview actually made an effort, sort of a last minute effort to try to save the rocks as they were, but it did not work. So hundreds of carvings, paintings were lost, you know, if you told them all the ones that were taken away as a part of this project. So that's what it looked like in the early 2000s, and that's what it more or less looks like today, up there around Diversey where the rocks were. I like to think of this as kind of a consolation prize. Some of those old rocks, limestone blocks, were saved and were used to line the top of the concrete and steel revetment, including, fortunately, the O Sole Mio block is still there. And there are a few other paintings and carvings that you can find if you walk along here. But most of them, along with all the thousands of other petroglyphs in the areas where this work was done, are gone. About half of all the limestone blocks that were once lined the shore have been removed as part of these projects, which, you know, the new revetment basically stretches from south of from Montrose Harbor all the way south, almost to Promontory Point, with a few exceptions. That's what happened there. Let's see. There we go. There it is under construction up at Diversey. Interestingly, and here it is under deterioration. If you walk along there, you will see several spots where the concrete is already getting chipped away by the action of the waves. So concrete is not a permanent solution either, it would appear. Again, as many of the people on this call know, at Promontory Point, the community in Hyde Park actually resisted the destruction of those beautiful limestone revetments. And Promontory Point remains intact for all of us to enjoy, which is a good thing. From many points of view, you know, mine is focused mostly on the rocks, on the carvings on the rocks. And here are a few examples. This one is particularly delicate. You know, unfortunately, the leaf on the left is some. here. So they're, you know, here out near Morgan Shoal. Now, I mean, I view these carvings as threatened. There's the emergency work going on right now to try to deal with the flooding. Fortunately, the Illinois Historic Preservation Agency has taken an interest in Morgan Shoal and is working to make sure that the current emergency work doesn't damage the historic resources there. You know, the city has long-run plans to improve and rehab the whole shoreline here and potentially expand the parkland. You know, which puts the carvings under threat, though I think there's good reason to hope that if enough effort is made that the best of these carvings can be preserved and incorporated into whatever plan the city comes up with. Just a little bit more of the deterioration, because this is the same place as in that picture from the 1950s I showed, and you can kind of see from that to that, and you can see the results of older efforts to try to preserve the shoreline here, these concrete decks that were added sometime after the 1950s. An example of what the city can do when they actually try to preserve historic resources is at Fullerton Avenue. The boulders there were installed in 1925, but torn out along with all the other Army Corps work in 2015. But the good luck was that the landscape architects that were engaged to work on this project, because the city decided they were going to add some landfill here and extend Lincoln Park a little further out into the lake. And the landscape architect was aware of the carvings, and she said they saved as many as they could, and they reinstalled them in this new parkland. And they created this lovely seating area. And you'll note here, this is what we like to call the hair washers. They're right there in that seating area. Now, when I showed this picture to Roman Villarreal, he said, well, they didn't really have very good tools when they made these carvings, because he thought the way the relief was done wasn't all it could be, but I think they're pretty lovely. There's a whole set of these Egyptian themed carvings. And again, these have all been preserved as part of this new parkland. Also, these Easter Island and Tiki style carvings are there as well, and many more, or a few more, including poor Leonardo out there, 1983, just kind of set out there in the middle of the grass. But in most cases, carvings are simply gone. When the Army Corps ripped out the limestone, in most places they did not save the carvings. These are all carvings that are no longer around. These pictures were all taken by Aaron Packer on this particular slide, by the way. So these are all from the 80s and 90s. That says Swiss, it's a Swiss shield. But look at the caveman. This says Montrose Man underneath it. This bathing beauty. I mean, these are just so remarkable. Another bunny, eyes, you know, scroll, AC/DC, 10 Commandments, all gone. These were all in the Belmont, Montrose Harbor area. They've all been torn out. Here's a few more from that general area. These were south of Montrose Harbor. You know, this was a very old carving. I mean, based on the style, it's sort of that flapper look, you know, and a newer one, but a very, very well executed carving. A couple of bathing beauties, the most anatomically correct bathing beauty that I've come across. That's my hand to give you a sense of the scale of this particular carving, face and profile. Another favorite, I call this carving the Montrose Giant. This was a very large carving. You can also see how deteriorated the revetment was, but this is a more than life-size figure. It resonates a little bit with this figure from Sydney, Australia. The difference is this was probably done in the 1960s. This is believed to be about 5,000 years old. What's interesting here is thinking about whether the drawing here, because these are a hand and feet drawn on, were they done by the carver and these that they never finished? These were supposed to be guides, or did someone just decide to take this incomplete carving and add some you know, more of a body to the giant? We don't know. Other carvings, and these are all gone. These have all disappeared. Bob in his beanie. This painting, which is nice, it was originally painted in 1993. You can see down at the bottom. Refreshed in 1997 and again in 2003, but that painting is gone. This painting, however, was added after the Army Corps did its work there. So this is from 2017. Someone went down there and did this kind of weird, funny, abstract painting with these, you know, a jellyfish and this kind of weird figure at the bottom. You know, which to me is, you know, the way I'm going to end this part of the presentation, because it shows the resilience of anonymous artists, the talent that some of them apply. And what I hope is that it'll keep giving us more to look at when we walk the lakefront. But with that, I can take any questions. And thank you.
All right. Bill, I thank you so much. This has been a wonderful presentation. And I think what I'm going to do here is allow everybody to unmute themselves so that we can have a live conversation. So I just did that. So if you want to ask a question, you should be able to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask it.
I'll unshare the screen so that we can see people. Does that
Yeah,
make sense?
if you would stop sharing your screen,
Yep,
we can see
there we go.
everybody.
Yep.
All right.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
I wanted to congratulate you on being on the board of SCA. I'm probably the only member of the Historical Society who's also a member of SCA.
Well, thank you.
So, and I enjoyed your talk. But how much of this is going to disappear as the water level keeps rising?
You know, it's a good question. I can tell you that some of them have already disappeared or inaccessible. So at Rainbow Beach, there's a jetty that goes out in the water that I'm sure 20 years ago was easily accessible. And now it's, you know, you have to be pretty brave to go out there. And there are carvings that are underwater. For the most part, these are high enough that they're, you know, given that the lake now is at pretty close to historic high, I think most of these are not going to be covered by water. Although I have to say photographing them's got harder because a lot of them are often wet because the waves do go up onto the rocks. But I think the threat to these carvings is less from the lake and more from, I hate to say it, but from the government and well-intentioned projects to preserve the lakefront, just not to preserve these particular stones.
Bill, I have a question. Go ahead, Ken.
Okay, did you use any special photographic technique to bring out the relief and to make the carvings more clear?
I wish I could say yes. I wish I were a photographer. I would have done a much better job. Aaron's photos are pretty good because when he took them, although he never became a photographer, he had ambitions to become a photographer. So he actually tried very hard. I've spent so many hours taking pictures and I kick myself for not having gotten more sophisticated. But I have done a fair amount with Photoshop to try to make them as visible as possible, let us say.
Okay, thank you.
I have a comment on that. I saw a video from a National Geographic photographer who had to do some petroglyphs, and there was like almost no contrast, and they used a real slow exposure on a tripod and at night, and used light, you know, like colored lights and flashlights across the stone, and it made really amazing pictures. So someone might want to play with something like that.
Yeah, I kick myself for not being a good photographer like that. I have learned though about time of day. If you want to photograph these, you really want to go out in the morning when you get the eastern sun and you get shadow, because if you don't have good artificial lighting and you're depending on the sun, then shadow is your friend, because that's how you can really define the carvings.
Have you considered making a book of these pictures?
Well, actually, yes, I have. I've queried a couple of publishers. I have it in front of one right now.
Good.
Keeping my fingers crossed. But if the publishers don't buy, my plan is to print it myself and come up with a model for selling and distributing it. But yeah, that's that's been my focus for the last couple of years, is to try to get enough photos and get good enough photos.
That'd be nice.
Good enough shape to
And
publish.
would you include the location of things so we can go find them?
That's my hope is yes, where I know the location. There are some of those where I don't know the location, and of course, some of the carvings, some of the best carvings are gone. So
Well,
no one's going to find them. But yes, I will. The hope is to include locations.
great.
The first lion and horse that you showed, do you know where they are at?
Wait, which one? I'm
On
sorry.
the slide.
Your audio cut out for a second there.
I think they were up at Montrose.
But which
The
image?
lion that was
Oh, no,
then
the lion
painted.
that's north of Foster Beach.
Forster.
You know, the most, if you want to go look at carvings, the best places to look in terms of accessibility, there are three I recommend. One is Promontory Point, although they're kind of spread out there. The second is Foster, really from Hollywood, from Osterman Beach all the way to the north end of Montrose Beach. It's accessible, right? The rocks are in pretty good shape. Whereas Morgan Shoal is a mess. You know, you got to be pretty brave and Rainbow Beach, same thing. And then Calumet Park, all the way at the south end of the city, those are accessible as well because the rocks are in good shape. But those are the places where it's kind of safe. I mean, I feel like an idiot sometimes because I'm not convinced, or I wouldn't do it. But you know, I'm crawling around these rocks. I'm no spring chicken, you know. And the last thing I need is to break my leg. And it would not be hard to do in some of these areas. I'm very careful when I go out there.
Bill,
Go ahead, Dottie.
there was an observation just posted in the chat that gar is also a fish species in northeastern America. Any comment?
That could be that was intended. You know, I that's one thing I have to remember to do is I'll look that up and see if that fish has any resemblance to a garfish. I have no idea. I've looked up a lot of obscure things in my research, but that's not one I looked up.
I've photographed a lot of the same exact ones that you have, and I've done that probably since I was a student at the Institute of Design. And I bicycle very early in the morning and photograph sunrises. And then I live in Edgewater, and I would recommend that anybody who wants to go see a lot of these things to walk the rocks there. But the best time of day is early in the morning when the sun is raking across the textures of these carvings, which reveals the three-dimensionality. I even carry a little brush with me to sweep up and clean up sometimes. So if you haven't sort of dedicated a little trip to looking down, it's rather amazing. And one last comment. When I started, and this goes back to probably the 60s, I had a philosophy about this, that these the carvings, and particularly the paintings, which, like you mentioned, don't last very long, but that they represented something about the culture of the individuals, the people, the groups that lived directly west of where the carvings and the paintings were. And so I looked at it as an interesting document of the cultures that lived around there. I never followed up on it a lot, but
That
that was a thought.
Yeah, no, Steph, I think you're right. I wish I got up as early as you did. You do.
Oh, you should. It's
know,
very rewarding.
easier said than done, but I might try. But to your last comment, I will say, for example, and you may have seen this one, in that Montrose, north of Montrose Beach, there's a carving that says Gaylords, and it has some gang symbols, and the Gaylords were an uptown street gang in the 1970s. So there are, you know, there's an interesting carving that says, again, near in that same area, I think it says like made by Mexicans in the USA, and there are others. Some of them are happy carvings. There's also a couple swastikas, and I didn't show it, but at La Rabida, on one of the rocks, it unfortunately says carved in reserved for white people.
Oh, geez.
So there is a history that is available and viewable on these rocks. Some of it wonderful, and some of it not
Very
always.
interesting.
I wanted to follow up on that. I was curious on the south side if there were any carvings that were somehow identifiable as done by African Americans, because the names I saw usually were older, sounded sort of Italian or Mexican, but maybe it's not identifiable.
No, it's a very fair question, and the answer is not. You know, I haven't been able to make that connection. You know, it's I've wondered that myself. You know, the carvings that were made in the, you know, the earlier the carvings, the less likely, but a lot of them were made in the 60s and 70s. So I don't know. That's a very good question.
This is a question for Steph. Steph, are your pictures available for us to see?
Yeah, some of them. I don't know if I've posted many of them on. I have a Facebook page. My name is Steph, S-T-E-F, as you can see. And my last name is Leinwohl, which is spelled L-E-I-N-W-O-H-L. I don't have a web page per se. I won't go into why, but I go back, and my parents were radicals in the 30s and 40s and McCarthy period, so that washed into my life.
Well, Steph,
So
if
I'm
we
very
could
paranoid.
make contact with you later, the Historical Society, I'm sure, would be love to post some of those pictures, and I'm sure Bill would as well.
Oh yeah. So,
Yeah, I have a horde of them. I have a lot of Kodachrome and Ektachrome slides.
Whoa.
And a lot of black and whites too, and
Great.
I still photograph them. I photograph the same exact ones over and over again, even because of the light qualities.
yeah, I do too. I know that feeling well.
What's Monet?
I see someone asked in the chat, where does graffiti start and art stop? Which is an interest. I would have put it the other way. Where does graffiti stop and art start? But, you know, that's a good question. A lot of graffiti artists would say, you know, there's no distinction. You know, generally, you know, the carvings are, you know, arguably a form of graffiti, and it's how you assess. And as it is with graffiti art, it depends on how you assess the quality of the work and what your views are towards graffiti. You know, I think when we look at these lakefront carvings, they're all made on public property. No one was damaging private property. And, you know, I think you can make a pretty good case there in an enhancement. Where I think the art stops and the graffiti starts is there are many, many cases that I've seen over the years where people have spray painted graffiti on top of the carvings. Some cases with something in mind, but often just defacing them, you know, which I don't appreciate. I would say that that is not art, that's defacement, but, you know, that's a very subjective question. So, you know, we all kind of have our own answer to that, I think.
Some people think some art is not art too.
That's true. And of course,
It's hard to draw lines there.
I personally have a very broad definition of what constitutes art. So
If I say it's art, it's art. That's Marcel Duchamp.
Yeah.
So Bill, one of the wonderful things about all these is that they're so spontaneous and almost indigenous that they don't, this is not self-conscious art. Has there been any informal suggestion that artists natural people, normal people could make some art on the new concrete revetments, and that might be an enhancement to cover up some of the ugliness?
I think so.
Might be.
Unfortunately, security has become a much bigger issue. If you, in the 1940s and into the 1970s, they were pouring concrete on top of the old limestone revetments to try to fill in spaces. So like that area around Calumet Park, there's lots of people who actually, use sticks to draw their names in the concrete. Like people do everywhere where they draw their names in the concrete, which, it can be annoying. Again, it gets to that question of where does graffiti end and art start? One could say it's an enhancement, but when they pour the concrete for these revetments, no one can get to them. But I think it would be great for people to paint those revetments, the concrete. To your point, Jack, I think that would be fabulous. The city should encourage people to go out there and paint it, but so far, clearly it hasn't happened. It's not as inspiring. People were much more inspired by the old revetments, I think.
Yeah. I have to say I have mixed feelings about people starting to paint that, because then it becomes graffiti all over this public space and could distract and detract from the public space rather than enhance it.
It's a debatable point. But I will say, and I don't think they should all be covered, but I'll say that area I showed at Foster, just north of Foster Beach, it was pretty nice in its heyday and people were painting and repainting that for quite a few years. I mean, Steph probably knows better than I think he's been out there longer than me. It was pretty cool back in its day, but I hear you. I mean, I'm not a complete lover of graffiti, of like just anarchic graffiti myself, much as I like some of it.
This person from years ago.
But imagine a new wall of respect painted on the south side on one of those revetments.
Exactly.
So Bill, the question has been asked.
So one question is, does this exist in other Great Lakes cities? I have not been able to answer that to my satisfaction, but to the extent that I've tried to investigate, I have not found anything like this. No one has mentioned it, no one I've talked to about it, and when I've looked at places I've been, I've really seen nothing quite like this. But partly because very few cities have this kind of unobstructed lakefront, or more importantly, had this kind of unobstructed lakefront in the 30s, 40s, and 50s and 60s when these carvings were made. In a lot of cities that now have parks along the lakefront, those parks were built much later, right? Because it was very unusual to have in the 20th century to have a waterfront that had almost no industry on it.
That's an interesting point. I never thought of that. What you do find is hordes of graffiti in cities, in all kinds of places. Some of it's fabulous, and now there are programs for murals honoring all kinds of public figures and jazz musicians and in their hometowns and things like that, or just graffiti itself. But I never thought about this aspect of we have this huge lakefront that people can go and carve on. There's almost, I don't know enough about it, but I guess you're sort of right. Most cities allowed their fronts to become commercialized. Therefore, this kind of environment doesn't exist anywhere else, hardly.
And it's so weird that Chicago, a city known for its hustle and its commerce and not caring about anything but money, historically, is the city that saved the lakefront. But someone asked where the limestone came from. I actually think, Jack, you know more than I do about that. Maybe you could answer that.
Indiana. It's Indiana limestone, the same limestone we're seeing in the city hall, et cetera. The blocks that are at the promontory point and in the revetment were what are called blanks. And they would take these blocks out before they would be carving them and when they found a blemish or a crack or something, and they discarded them. So you could get these for almost free for just the transportation of getting them. But they came out of the same quarries in Indiana that the Empire State Building and City Hall came out of.
There's a quarry that's, I don't know, not exactly in back of the yards, but on the near south side. I can't remember the exact location.
Well, that
When
was
I
probably
was-
the one that's now McGuane, that's in Bridgeport. That's now been turned into a park. But
Oh, yeah?
did not come, these, for as far as we know, these blocks did not come from that quarry. I think Jack is right. Others have attested to it. They came from Indiana.
Oh,
They were mostly quarried in Indiana. Any other
awful lot of
questions?
limestone.
Does anybody else have any other questions? Well, thank you all for coming, and most especially thank you to Bill for joining us and enlightening us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Well done.
It's great to be able to talk about these to people. So I appreciate your time.
Yes, and I'll have to say that I have been recording this session, so I'm hoping I had a brief outage in the middle, so there might be a few-minute gap, but I'm hoping to be able to put together a video of the presentation and post it to our website.
Okay.
That answers the question then, that other people will be able to share it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that would be most appreciated.
Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay,
Yes,
thank you.
thank you all for joining.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Bill. Well done.
Thank you.
Bill.